The garage door creaked open at 3 in the morning, and I heard my own daughter's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Mom, just take the furniture. Dad'll never fight back. He's a loser. Walter's a real man. He'll protect us." I froze, wrench in hand, motor oil still dripping from the Chevy's undercarriage. "Nice to know your kid thinks you're a doormat. Guess I should have skipped those softball games and bought a damn cape." My name's Aaron Taylor, and until that moment, I thought I knew my family. 42 years old, mechanical engineer at Hartwell Auto Parts, married to Kayla for 18 years. We lived in my mother's house, a sturdy two-story that had weathered 3 generations of Taylors in this Rust Belt town of Millbrook, Ohio. Population 8,000, where everyone knows your business before you do. I'd been working late in the garage, trying to fix Mrs. Henderson's ancient Impala for free because her pension couldn't cover repairs. That's the kind of guy I was. The dependable type, always overlooked next to Kayla and her new glitzy crowd from the community college where she'd been taking business courses. Through the kitchen window, I could see Kayla pacing, her blonde hair catching the fluorescent light. She'd been distant for months, always on her phone, always studying late. I'd chalked it up to midlife ambition, maybe even admired her drive. Judy, my 16-year-old daughter, sat at the kitchen table with her arms crossed. Even from the garage, I could see the contempt in her posture, the same look she'd been giving me since she started hanging out with the popular kids at Millbrook High. "Walter says we can move into his place next week," Kayla continued, her voice carrying that excited pitch she used to reserve for our anniversary dinners. "He's got that big house on Elm Street, the one with the pool." Walter Anderson. I knew the name, flashy guy who owned a used car lot, always wore suits that cost more than my monthly salary, drove a cherry red Mustang, and had a reputation for smooth-talking his way into anything he wanted. "What about Dad?" Judy asked, though her tone suggested she didn't much care about the answer. "Your father will be fine. He's got his mother and his precious garage. Besides, Walter's offering me a real future, not just this. This. 18 years of marriage. A daughter I'd raised, a home I'd maintained, reduced to this." I set down the wrench and wiped my hands on an old rag, my mind racing. The moving van I'd seen parked down the street yesterday suddenly made sense. The hushed phone calls, the new clothes, the way Kayla had been treating me like a stranger in my own home. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your wife's been busy. Check her laptop. Password is Walter, 123. A friend." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling slightly. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend I'd never seen it, go back to being the loyal, dependable Aaron who fixed everyone's problems and asked for nothing in return. Instead, I walked into the house. Kayla's laptop sat open on the counter, screensaver bouncing around like a taunt. Judy had gone upstairs, and Kayla was in the shower. I could hear the water running. I typed in the password. It worked. Her email was a goldmine of betrayal. Months of messages between her and Walter, explicit photos, detailed plans for their future together. But what really got me were the messages where they mocked me, my factory stink, my pathetic devotion, my complete inability to see what was happening right under my nose. One message from Walter made my blood boil. "Don't worry about Aaron. He's too much of a coward to fight for anything. We'll take what we want, and he'll just roll over like he always does." Kayla's response. "You're right. He's never stood up for himself once in his entire life. This will be easy." I closed the laptop and walked back to the garage, my mind surprisingly clear. They wanted a villain? I'd burn the whole damn circus down. The next morning, I drove to Walter's place on Elm Street. His house was everything mine wasn't. Modern, ostentatious, screaming new money. The red Mustang sat in the driveway like a trophy. I parked across the street and pulled out my phone, scrolling through more of Kayla's messages. Walter had been feeding her lines about starting fresh, about deserving better than a grease monkey husband. He'd promised her trips to Europe, designer clothes, a lifestyle that my factory salary could never provide. What he hadn't mentioned in those messages was his financial situation. I'd done some digging at work. Millbrook's a small town, and the factory guys know everything about everyone. Walter's car lot was hemorrhaging money, his house was mortgaged to the hilt, and he'd been borrowing from some very unfriendly people. But Kayla didn't know that. She saw the flash, the promises, the escape from her mundane life with boring old Aaron. I got out of my car and walked to the Mustang. Beautiful machine, probably worth more than Walter could afford. I pulled out my pocket knife and considered my options. Slashing tires was petty, obvious. Instead, I loosened the valve stems on all 4 tires. Not enough to cause immediate damage, but enough to ensure they'd be flat within a few hours. Then I left a note under his windshield wiper. "You break it, you bought it. A." As I walked back to my car, I noticed Gordon Martinez, Walter's elderly neighbor, watching from his front window. Gordon was the neighborhood gossip, always had his nose in everyone's business. He was holding something, probably his phone, taking pictures. Let him. By the time this was over, everyone in Millbrook would know exactly what kind of man Walter Anderson really was. I drove to work at Hartwell Auto Parts, a massive factory complex on the outskirts of town. The plant employed half of Millbrook, churning out alternators and starters for Ford and GM. I'd worked there for 15 years, starting on the assembly line and working my way up to senior engineer. The gossip mill was already churning when I arrived. Sharon Coleman, who worked in HR, pulled me aside during my coffee break. "Aaron, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but people are talking," she said, her voice gentle but direct. Sharon was in her late 30s, divorced, with short brown hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "About what?" "About Kayla and Walter Anderson. I'm sorry, honey, but it's all over town. They were seen together at Romano's last weekend, holding hands." Romano's was the fanciest restaurant in Millbrook, the kind of place you took someone when you wanted to make a statement. "Thanks for telling me," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "You deserve better than this, Aaron. Everyone knows you're a good man." A good man. The kind of man who worked overtime to pay for his wife's college courses, who never complained when she spent money they didn't have, who fixed everyone's cars for free and asked nothing in return. Maybe it was time to stop being such a good man. My phone buzzed, a text from Kayla. "Nice try with Walter's car, Aaron. Grow up." So she knew about the tires. Walter must have called her when he found them flat. I typed back, "Just getting started." Her response came immediately. "Don't threaten us. Walter's not afraid of you." I smiled, typing, "He should be." The rest of my shift passed in a blur of planning. I knew Walter's routines. He spent every Friday night at Murphy's Tavern, the local bar where he held court with anyone willing to listen to his stories about military service that I was pretty sure he'd never actually performed. Murphy's was neutral ground in Millbrook, the kind of place where factory workers and car dealers could drink side by side without too much trouble. But it was also where reputations were made and destroyed, where the wrong word at the wrong time could follow you for years. I had some words for Walter Anderson. Friday night at Murphy's Tavern was standing room only. The bar occupied a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, with a dozen flat-screen TVs showing various sporting events. The crowd was typical Millbrook, factory workers still in their uniforms, office types trying to look casual, and the usual collection of retirees who treated the place like their personal social club. I nursed a beer in the corner, watching Walter hold court near the pool table. He was telling some story about his time in Afghanistan, gesturing dramatically with a whiskey glass. The audience, mostly younger guys who didn't know better, hung on every word. I knew the truth about Walter's military service because I'd checked. He'd enlisted in the Army, sure enough, but he'd been discharged during basic training for chronic back problems. Never saw combat, never left. Georgia. But that didn't stop him from spinning tales about firefights and heroic rescues. Kayla arrived at 9:30, dressed in a tight black dress I'd never seen before. She made a beeline for Walter, who wrapped his arm around her waist with proprietary confidence. Several people in the bar noticed, whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. I finished my beer and walked over to their group. "Evening, Walter," I said, my voice carrying just enough to be heard over the music. "Telling war stories again?" Walter's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Aaron, didn't expect to see you here. How's the factory life treating you?" "Can't complain. Speaking of complaints, how's that back injury that got you discharged from basic training? Still bothering you?" The group around us went quiet. Walter's face flushed red, and Kayla shot me a warning look. "I don't know what you're talking about," Walter said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really? Because I've got your service records right here on my phone. Turns out the Army keeps pretty good documentation. Want me to read them out loud?" "Aaron, stop," Kayla hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I? Or am I just sharing some interesting facts about your boyfriend's imaginary military career?" Walter stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me. "You need to back off, Taylor." "Or what? You'll tell me another story about the time you single-handedly took out a Taliban stronghold, because that's a good one, considering you never left Fort Benning." The crowd around us had grown larger, drawn by the tension. I could see phones coming out. In a town like Millbrook, a public confrontation was prime social media material. "You're just jealous because Kayla finally found a real man," Walter said, his voice rising. I laughed, the sound harsh in the suddenly quiet bar. "A real man? Walter, you're 45 years old, you live in a house you can't afford, drive a car that's leased in your business's name, and you've been telling stolen valor stories for so long you probably believe them yourself. That's enough. Walter shoved me, hard enough to make me stumble backward. Big mistake. I'd grown up in Millbrook, where you learn to fight or learn to run. I'd never been much of a runner. I came back at Walter with a right cross that caught him square in the jaw, sending him sprawling into the pool table. The bar erupted in chaos. Kayla screamed, Walter's friends rushed to help him up, and the bartender started yelling about calling the cops. But before anyone could stop me, I grabbed Walter's whiskey glass and dumped it over his head. The amber liquid ran down his face, soaking his expensive shirt. Next time you want to steal someone's wife, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, make sure you can afford to keep her. I walked out of Murphy's to a mixture of cheers and shocked silence, leaving Walter dripping and humiliated on the floor. My phone started buzzing before I reached my car. Text after text, some supportive, others critical. But the one that mattered came from Kayla. You've lost your mind, Aaron. My lawyer will be in touch. I typed back, looking forward to it. But as I drove home, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold realization. I just escalated things beyond the point of no return. Kayla would file for divorce, probably try for full custody of Judy, and with my public outburst at Murphy's, she might actually succeed, unless I got there first. Monday morning brought a registered letter from Patterson and Associates, attorneys at law. Kayla had wasted no time. She was filing for divorce, seeking full custody of Judy, alimony, and half of everything I owned, including the house that had been in my family for 3 generations. The letter also included a restraining order request, claiming I'd been increasingly violent and unstable. My confrontation with Walter at Murphy's was cited as evidence, along with several other incidents that had been creatively reinterpreted to make me sound like a dangerous lunatic. I called in sick to work and drove to the office of Ron Jeremy. Yes, that was actually his name, and yes, he'd heard all the jokes. Ron was Millbrook's most ruthless divorce attorney, a thin man with prematurely gray hair and the predatory instincts of a shark. Aaron Taylor, he said, reviewing the papers I'd brought. I heard about your performance at Murphy's. Half the town's talking about it. Is that good or bad for my case? Depends on how we spin it. Your wife's attorney is painting you as an unstable husband who can't control his temper. But public opinion seems split. A lot of people think Walter Anderson had it coming. Ron leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with calculating eyes. The real problem is the house. If your mother doesn't have ironclad documentation proving ownership, Kayla might be able to claim it as marital property. The house has been in my family since 1952. My mother's name is on the deed. Good. What about joint accounts, credit cards, assets? I'd already thought about that. I moved our savings to a personal account this morning, canceled her credit cards, took her name off the insurance policies. Smart. What about your daughter? That was the painful part. Judy's been distant for months. Kayla's convinced her that I'm some kind of failure, that Walter represents a better life. Kids can be manipulated, Aaron, but they can also be shown the truth. Question is, how far are you willing to go to protect yourself and your family's legacy? I thought about Walter's smug face, Kayla's betrayal, Judy's contempt. As far as it takes. Ron smiled, and I realized I was looking at a kindred spirit. Then let's get to work. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and strategic planning. Ron filed counter motions, challenging every aspect of Kayla's divorce petition. More importantly, he put me in touch with a private investigator named Tommy Russo, a former cop who specialized in matrimonial cases. Tommy's report on Walter Anderson was a masterpiece of financial archaeology. The car lot was 3 months behind on rent, Walter owed money to half the banks in the county, and his house was in pre-foreclosure. The red Mustang wasn't even his. It belonged to the dealership, which was itself owned by a holding company that was being investigated for tax evasion. But the real gold mine was Walter's personal life. He'd been married twice before, both marriages ending in acrimonious divorces when his wives discovered his affairs. He had a gambling problem, a drinking problem, and a tendency to borrow money from people who collected debts with baseball bats. Your wife picked a real winner, Tommy said, handing me a thick folder of documentation. Question is, what do you want to do with this information? I knew exactly what I wanted to do. That evening, I drove to Kayla's temporary apartment, a sterile one-bedroom place she'd rented across town. Her car was in the parking lot, but Walter's Mustang was nowhere to be seen. I knocked on the door. When she answered, I could see the surprise in her eyes. Aaron, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Kayla, about your future with Walter. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was sparse, filled with boxes and the kind of cheap furniture you buy when you're starting over. If you're here to apologize, I'm not. I set Tommy's folder on her coffee table. I'm here to show you who you're really leaving me for. She stared at the folder suspiciously. What is that? Walter's financial records, his criminal background check, his employment history, everything you should have known before you decided to blow up our marriage. I don't want to see it. Yes, you do, because deep down, you know something's not right. The house he can't really afford, the car that's not in his name, the business that's hemorrhaging money. You know, Kayla, you just don't want to admit it. She picked up the folder with trembling hands, and I watched her face change as she read. The color drained from her cheeks, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her hands began to shake. This can't be right, she whispered. It's all documented. Bank records, court filings, police reports. Walter Anderson is a con man, Kayla, and you're his latest mark. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Why are you showing me this? Because despite everything, I still love you, and I won't let you destroy our family for a man who's just using you. For a moment, I thought I'd reached her. She looked vulnerable, lost, like the woman I'd married 18 years ago. Then her expression hardened. Get out, she said quietly. Kayla, get out. She threw the folder at me, papers scattering across the floor. I don't care what your private investigator found. Walter loves me, and that's more than you ever did. I gathered up the papers, shaking my head. When this all falls apart, don't say I didn't warn you. It won't fall apart. And even if it does, I'd rather be broke and alone than spend another day married to you. I walked to the door, then turned back. What about Judy? Are you really willing to put her through this for a man you barely know? Judy will be fine. She'll have a father who actually cares about success, about making something of himself. Walter's not her father, Kayla. I am. Biology isn't everything, Aaron. You taught me that. I left her apartment with the bitter taste of finality in my mouth. There would be no reconciliation, no moment of clarity where she realized her mistake. Kayla had chosen her path, and she was going to walk it all the way to the end, but that didn't mean I had to make it easy for her. The Millbrook Community Center hosted a monthly town council meeting, but this month was special. They were also holding the annual Business Leaders Recognition Dinner, a fancy name for a potluck where local entrepreneurs could network and show off. Walter had bought a table, probably his last desperate attempt to drum up business for his failing car lot. Kayla would be there as his date, playing the role of the successful businessman's girlfriend. I had other plans for the evening. Sharon Coleman had agreed to help me, partly out of friendship and partly because she had her own grudge against Walter. He'd sold her a lemon 2 years ago and refused to make good on the warranty. Are you sure about this, Aaron? She asked as we reviewed our plan. Once you do this, there's no taking it back. There's already no taking it back, Sharon. Kayla made sure of that. We were sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by printouts, photographs, and legal documents. My mother, Brenda, sat at the head of the table, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. That woman never deserved you, Brenda said, her voice carrying the authority of 78 years of no-nonsense living. But are you sure this is the right way to handle it? Mom, they're trying to take everything. The house, Judy, my reputation. If I don't fight back now, I'll lose it all. Brenda nodded slowly. Then you do what you have to do, but you do it right. The community center was packed when we arrived. Round tables filled the main hall, decorated with cheap centerpieces and flickering candles. A small stage at the front held a podium and microphone, where various speakers would present awards and recognition certificates. I spotted Walter immediately. He was impossible to miss in his expensive suit, holding court at a table near the front. Kayla sat beside him, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than most people in the room made in a week. Judy was there too, looking uncomfortable in a formal dress she clearly didn't want to wear. She kept checking her phone, probably posting about how boring the whole event was. I took a table in the back with Sharon, Gordon Martinez, and a few other neighbors who'd agreed to support me. We looked like any other group of community members, nothing special or threatening. The evening progressed through the usual small-town pageantry, awards for business excellence, community service, and entrepreneurial spirit. Walter had apparently paid for a Newcomer Achievement Award, which he accepted with a speech about his commitment to Millbrook and his plans for expansion. He's really laying it on thick, Sharon whispered as Walter talked about his vision for the future. Just wait, I replied. When the formal presentations ended, the microphone was opened for community announcements. People shared information about upcoming events, charity drives, and local concerns. I stood up and walked to the stage. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aaron Taylor, and I've lived in Millbrook my whole life. I work at Hartwell Auto Parts, I coach Little League, and until recently, I thought I knew what kind of community we had here. The room quieted, sensing something was about to happen. I could see Walter shifting uncomfortably in his seat, and Kayla's face had gone pale. Tonight, we honored several business leaders for their contributions to our town, but I think it's important that we know who we're really honoring. I pulled out a folder. Not the same one I'd shown Kayla, but a carefully curated selection of Walter's most damning financial records. Walter Anderson, who just received the Newcomer Achievement Award, is currently 3 months behind on his business rent. His car lot owes over $200,000 to various creditors, and his personal residence is in pre-foreclosure. The room erupted in murmurs. Walter started to stand, but I continued before he could speak. But that's not the worst part. Mr. Anderson has been telling people in this community that he's a combat veteran, that he served our country in Afghanistan. I have his military records right here, and they tell a different story. I held up the documents. Walter Anderson was discharged from Army basic training for medical reasons. He never served overseas, never saw combat, and never earned the right to claim veteran status. "That's enough," Walter shouted, finally finding his voice. "You're just a bitter husband who can't accept that his wife found someone better." The crowd turned to look at him, and I could see the calculation in their faces. This was better than cable TV. "You're right, Walter. My wife did leave me for you, and I want everyone here to know exactly what kind of man she chose." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the community center's sound system. Sharon had helped me set it up earlier. These are voicemail messages Walter left for my wife, talking about their plans for the future. Walter's voice filled the room, tinny but clear through the speakers. "Don't worry about Aaron, baby. He's too much of a coward to fight for anything. We'll take what we want, and he'll just roll over like he always does." Gasps echoed through the hall. I played another message. "Your husband's pathetic, Kayla. Factory stink and no ambition. You deserve a real man, someone who can give you the life you want." The crowd was getting restless now, some people standing to get a better view of the drama unfolding. Walter looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "But here's my favorite," I said, queuing up one more message. "This one's from last week," Walter's voice again. "Can't wait for you to get that house in the divorce. We can sell it and use the money to save the car lot. Your husband will never know what hit him." The room exploded in angry voices. Several people shouted at Walter, calling him a fraud and a coward. Someone yelled, "Stolen valor," and others took up the cry. Kayla tried to stand, probably to defend Walter or escape the humiliation, but she caught her heel on the tablecloth and went down hard, taking the centerpiece and several glasses with her. She landed in a puddle of punch and broken glass, her red dress stained and torn. The crowd laughed, not maliciously, but with the kind of nervous energy that comes from witnessing someone's complete social destruction. Walter tried to help her up, but she pushed him away, tears streaming down her face. "This is your fault," she screamed at him. "You said he'd never fight back." "I didn't know he had recordings," Walter protested. "You didn't know a lot of things," Kayla shot back, "like how to run a business, or tell the truth, or—" "Mom, stop!" Judy's voice cut through the chaos. My daughter stood up, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Just stop. Everyone's watching." But it was too late. Someone had started live streaming the confrontation on Facebook, and phones were recording from every angle. By morning, the entire debacle would be all over social media. I walked back to the microphone as the crowd gradually quieted down. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. You've all learned something important about the people you choose to trust and support. As for me, I've learned that sometimes the only way to protect your family and your community is to stand up and tell the truth, no matter how ugly it might be." I looked directly at Walter, who was trying to help Kayla clean punch off her dress. "Walter, you wanted to take everything from me, my wife, my daughter, my home, my reputation. But here's what you didn't understand. I'm not the man you thought I was. I'm not going to roll over. I'm not going to let you destroy my family for your own selfish gain." I held up one final document. "This is a restraining order, filed this morning, preventing you from contacting my wife or daughter. It's also a cease and desist order regarding your fraudulent business practices, which have been reported to the State Attorney General's office." Walter's face went white. "You can't—" "I already did. Your car lot will be shut down pending investigation. Your assets will be frozen, and your creditors have been notified that you're attempting to defraud them through a sham marriage." The crowd was dead silent now, watching the final act of Walter's destruction. "Oh, and Walter, that red Mustang you're so proud of? It's being repossessed tomorrow morning. The bank called me as a courtesy since I used to work on their fleet vehicles." Walter looked around the room desperately, seeking some escape or support, but found only hostile faces and recording phones. His carefully constructed image had been obliterated in less than 20 minutes. He grabbed Kayla's arm. "We're leaving." "Don't touch me," she snapped, jerking away from him. "This is all your fault. You said you were successful. You said you could take care of us." "I can. This is just temporary." "You're a liar. About everything." Kayla turned to face the crowd, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, everyone. I made a terrible mistake." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Aaron, Save it, Kayla. You made your choice. Now live with it." I walked off the stage and out of the community center, leaving behind the wreckage of Walter's reputation and Kayla's dreams. Sharon followed me, along with several neighbors who wanted to shake my hand and offer their support. "That was brutal," Sharon said as we reached the parking lot. "It was necessary." What happens now? I looked back at the community center, where people were still streaming out, chattering excitedly about what they'd witnessed. Now Walter loses everything he thought he was going to steal from me. His business, his house, his car, his reputation, and Kayla learns what it's like to be with a man who can't provide for her. And Judy. That was the hard part. Judy will have to decide who she really wants to be, someone who chooses sides based on money and status, or someone who values honesty and loyalty. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Proud of you, son. Come home." As I drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. I'd gone from being the dependable, overlooked husband to the man who'd publicly destroyed his wife's lover and exposed her betrayal to the entire community. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted for my marriage, but it was the ending Kayla and Walter had earned. 3 months later, Walter's car lot was permanently closed, and he'd left town to avoid his creditors. Kayla was working at a grocery store, living in a studio apartment, and facing the reality that her dreams of a glamorous life had been built on lies. Judy eventually came to see me, apologizing for her role in the family's destruction and asking if she could move back home. We had a lot of work to do to rebuild our relationship, but at least she was willing to try. As for me, I was dating Sharon Coleman, who appreciated a man who knew how to fight for what mattered. We were taking it slow, building something real instead of chasing fantasies. The house on Maple Street remained in the Taylor family, where it belonged, and every time I worked in the garage, I remembered the night I'd overheard my daughter calling me a loser and decided to prove her wrong. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be the victim someone expects you to be.